Hello and welcome, this is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing some quick layering stamp cards using the new Wild About You stamp set from Simon Hurley and Spellbinders. And there's also a coordinating die set. So I'm going to be stamping these images and then I'm going to be die cutting them and creating some very simple backgrounds for them. The back of the packaging shows you how the layers go together. Each one of these animals has 2 layers to them. And then there's also a bunch of sentiments that work perfectly with this theme of this stamp set. So before I use my new acrylic stamp sets, I always like to take a white eraser and just rub along the stamping surface. This removes any manufacturing residue that sometimes prohibits ink from sticking to the stamp. So I just do the entire stamp set. Even if I'm only going to use one set or one stamp, I do the whole thing. So I know if I've used anything from that stamp set, the whole thing is done. This step only needs to be done one time. So it's just easy to do the entire stamp set all at once. I'm using some Hammermill Cardstock to stamp on, and this is a piece that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches, so you get an idea of how big or how small these stamps are. So I can fit 2 on this first one, and the next one I'm going to be able to fit all 3 of the ones that I want to do on there. So the first one I'm going to use, I think it's a Jaguar. I'm using the black Soot Distress ink to ink it and then stamp the spots. And then I'm using the rusty Hinge distress pad on the giraffe to stamp the spots for that. So this stamp set, even though it's a layering stamp set and there's 2 layers to it, the second layer has quite a unique look to it. Often with layering stamps, one of the layers has a solid image to it. These other layers don't have solid images to it. It's almost like they do the shading for it. So I have to say it was a little bit more challenging than some layering stamp sets to match up those layers to see exactly where they go. So I just did one at a time, and you can see every once in a while the corner of my head pops in. Most of my head blocking the screen, I edited out so you didn't see that. But you do want to look right above the stamp. That's the easiest way to get a clear view of how it's lining up. So you can see right through that stamp set, and that's always nice with clear stamps to be able to see right through them. So for this second layer for the giraffe, I used the Scattered Straw Distress Ink pad, and then I went in with some Fossilized Amber, and I'm going to just deepen that color a little bit. I also used the Scattered Straw on the Jaguar. Hopefully I have the names of the animals right. I'm pretty sure this one is, but I could be wrong. So then I go in with the Fossilized Amber. It's just a little bit darker than that Scattered Straw. I wanted this layer, even though it doesn't have a solid layer to it, I wanted it to have a little bit of shading. It's going to give the animals just a little bit of depth. And the fact that there are matching dies for this makes it really easy to have these as a focal point on a card and then just create a really simple ink blended background for it. So here is the final result of those 2 there. And you can see, especially with that Jaguar there, how there's some areas that are still white. You don't see it as much on the giraffe as you do on that one. But it creates a really interesting and unique look to it. So for my second one here, I'm doing the other ones. There is a zebra and then there's 2 tigers, 2 different profiles. So I'm going to be doing those all in one. And it doesn't really matter how they're positioned on here because I am going to be die cutting them, but you do want to make sure that you give some space to allow room for those dies to make sure that they're not too close to each other. And you can see that they're a good distance apart from each other. For this one here, the first layers I'm going to do in black soot. And depending on the ink coverage, sometimes I stamp one time, sometimes I stamp multiple times. Some of these stamps, and I'm not sure if it's how I was storing them, some of them have a little bit rounded edge to them. So I wanted to do extra stamping on some of those edges just to make sure that I get a clear stamping of them. And this is where using a Misti stamping tool comes in so handy, because if there's an area that gets missed, it makes it really, really easy to go back in and press that area of the stamp to make sure that that is completely covered. For the next layer of the tiger, I'm going in with the Fossilized Amber, and then I'm going to go in with the Rusty Hinge just to give that shading. So I want some areas to be that golden orangey color, and then I want some to have more of an orangey tone to them. Again, just to give it a little bit more depth and dimension. When I do that second color, I only ink part of the edges, and then I take an ink blending brush and I buff the inner part of the stamp just to make sure there's no harsh stamp pad lines to them. Now I'm doing each one of these animals separately. You could do them all together if you want, but for the second one, because there was 3 animals, I figured it'd be a little bit easier to do those second layers just one at a time. So for the second layer for the zebra, I'm using some Lost Shadow. It's just a really, really light gray. And then I'm going in with some Hickory Smoke, which is kind of a medium-ish gray. Once again, doing the edges where I want the shading to go, and then using an ink blending brush just to smooth out those edges so I don't have any harsh lines to it. So that zebra is one of the stamps that has the curved edges, so you can see me going back in a couple times, and part of that is to make sure that I get that whole image in there. Then we have the second tiger here, and I'm going to do the same as the first one. So I'm going to use that Fossilized Amber first, and then I'm going to go in with that Rusty Hinge and make sure to use my ink blending brush to buff out those edges and smooth them out a little bit. So the Fossilized Amber goes over the entire stamp, and I'll do it a couple times again, depending on the ink coverage the first time. If I get some good ink coverage and it's completely clear and I see all of it, I will only do it one time. But if I think I want that color deepened a little bit, doing it that second time helps as well. Then I go in with that Rusty Hinge and use my blending brush on that stamp. Before I put these stamps away, I just use a damp microfiber cloth to clean them, just to make sure that I don't have any ink left on them that could possibly get on my hands. So the lining up of the stamps or the dies is really, really easy. I do like to use some Best Ever craft tape in order to tape those dies in place and make sure they're not going to move on me while I'm doing my die cutting. There's a little tiny halo around the whole image of the animal, which makes it really easy to make sure that it is lined up and centered. Sometimes as I'm taping it, I'll accidentally press that die and move it. So if I do that, I will lift that up and adjust that and then readjust where that tape is, just to make sure that I've got the placement that I want. This makes it really, really easy when it comes to the die cutting process. I don't have to worry about those dies moving on me, and I know that I'm going to have them cut how I want them to. So I'm using my Platinum 6 to cut those pieces out. As they are die cut, I will just set them to the side, so then I can create all of my backgrounds and work on each card as I go. So here are those animals die cut out, and you can see that halo all around them. And then we're going to do the giraffe and what I assume is a jaguar. Again, doing the same thing, making sure that halo is even all the way around the animal, and then putting that Best Ever craft tape. And that Best Ever craft tape, I'll reuse the same pieces over and over again until they stop sticking properly. That way I get a lot of use out of each piece. So they're not just one use and then I toss them. They still have a lot of stick and a lot of life left in them. I probably use them about a half a dozen times each, depending on what I'm sticking them to. Some things will lose the stick on that a little bit more than others, but for the most part I use them quite a few times. So as I was cutting them, I realized that when I was stamping the tail of this for the first layer with the spots, that there was a missing piece at the end. And I think this is another one of those stamps that was curved as well, that didn't get a complete stamping. So what I did was I took the piece that I cut it out of, put it in my Misti stamping tool. That way when I lined up my stamp, lifted it up, and that piece came with it, I could easily realign it. Now, when I did that first black layer of that one there, I only used one stamp layer. So when I stamped it for the tail and did a second stamping, you can see that it's a little bit darker than the rest of it. That's totally fine. At least it's not just half a stamped tail. Now it has the full image, and once we have it on the background, you're not going to see that quite as much. So for my backgrounds, and I'm doing the same size for all of my backgrounds for all of my cards, I have a piece of Hammermill Cardstock trimmed to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I'm using 3 different colors on the background. I'm using some crushed olive on the bottom for the grass, and then for the sky I'm starting with Tumbled glass and then going in with some broken china just to deepen that blue just a little bit. I'm doing really, really simple backgrounds for these. I think if I had a stamp that had some like exotic trees or whatnot from where these animals come from, I probably would use those on the background because I think they would be really good surroundings for these animals. I don't have anything like that. So I started by just using the animals plain on just a background. I'm using, each one of them has a sentiment to it. Most of them are going on the front of the cards. I will also be adding sentiment to the inside of most of the cards. As I'm putting these pieces down here, you can see that I'm kind of hesitating a little bit. And part of that is because it looks too sparse for me. So here is how I will fix it. First of all, I'm going to stamp that sentiment there. So I put the card front there, put my sentiment where I wanted it to go, made sure to have my magnet on my piece so it stayed in place, and then stamp that sentiment. And then I went through my stash just to look for some grasses or something that I could put to add a little bit of texture to that background. And that's part of the problem is I don't mind the colors on that background, but there's just no texture to it. So it's looking rather plain and rather sparse. While I'm still considering exactly what I'm going to do, I'm stamping on the inside of the card as well. And I really love that this Wild About You stamp set has so many different varieties and different options for sentiments. Some of them are perfect for certain animals. Like there's one that says something about earning your stripes or whatnot, works perfect for the zebra. There's some that are specific for the tiger. There's one that says something about measuring up, which is perfect for the giraffe. So they're pun sentiments, but I always love when sentiments work perfectly for the theme. So after going through my stash, I found this Jump for Joy sentiment set, and it has some grasses with bulrushes. Now I don't want those bulrushes for what I'm creating here, but I am going to use the grass part of the stamp. I put my card right back into my Misti. I'm using some Best Ever craft tape around the edges just to mask them off a little bit. I really should have done the inside of the card, the last piece that I did there. I should have done it a little bit taller. I do get a little bit of stamping on the mat, but at least it's not over the whole mat. So I'm going to line up that stamp. When it comes to inking it, and I'm using the same color that I used for ink blending that grass, so I'm using crushed olive, I am only ink blending up to those bulrushes. So I'm not actually inking those bulrushes. If by chance I get a little bit of ink on them, I am going to use my finger just to wipe it off a little bit, and then I'm going to stamp. So this is just going to add some texture to that background, and it really suits the image really, really well. Obviously, it would be a little bit easier if there wasn't those bulrushes there and I could just ink that entire stamp, but it works perfectly for what I need. It fills that in. It just gives it a little bit more interest, and I'm going to lift up the card and adjust it up because this stamp is quite long and I don't want it to hang off the edge of my Misti because I won't be able to get a clear stamp all the way to the bottom of the card. Then I'm inking that same stamp again. I'm trying to make the grass levels kind of stagger a little bit. I don't want it all exactly the same layer or same height. I want it just a little bit different. So especially right in front of where that animal is, I am putting a little bit of grass in front of that die cut, but I'm making sure that it's just a little bit lower so we see the details of the animal. I'm not trying to hide that. I'm trying to just kind of enhance it and make it look like it belongs and make it look like it's not floating in the middle of that card there. And I think that finished it off really, really nicely. Again, if I had some sort of trees or something that suited it, that would be fantastic as well. So with that done, I can take that tape off and put it to the side. I'll reuse it with another project. I did make sure to wipe that ink off though, because some of that ink got stamped onto that tape. I want to make sure that I'm not getting it on my fingers. So here is that finished card. Again, super, super simple, but it's effective, and I really love the sentiment that works perfectly with it. So I have another piece of Hammermill cardstock, and I forgot to say the mat that I used around that first card there was Tuscan cardstock, and that was cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. So very simple layers, but I just chose colors that brought out some of the colors in the animals. So that's why I chose the Tuscan for that one. It was perfect for the colors in that particular animal. So this background, again, very similar to that first one. Use crushed olive on the bottom, then some tumbled grass, and then lastly going in with that broken china just to fill in the top and give a little bit more texture there. So because I already have this stamp set out and I know that this background just needs a little bit more texture, I'm pulling out that stamp, and I'm doing the same thing that I did with that first card. The only difference here is I don't have the animal on there, so I don't have that in my way. Often when you're stamping on top of a die cut, you get a little bit of halo around it. So by doing this first, I'm going to get some clearer images, and I don't have to worry about avoiding that die cut. Now you'll notice as I'm stamping, sometimes I'll stamp again and press. There is a little raised edge or raised area in this particular stamp right in the middle of the grass. So I go back in and press it down, and that's where it comes in handy to have that Misti stamping tool. I don't need to re-ink that stamp at all. I just go back in and press that area to make sure that that part gets stamped. Then I go back in and fill in some of the areas, and by doing that, some of those areas get a little bit darker, but it just gives it a little bit more interest to it and a little bit more depth to it. So I'm going to do the same thing here, overlapping between a couple of the different layers of grass. And with that done, I'm ready to work on the rest of my card. So this one is going to have the zebra on it. I ended up choosing to put the sentiment on the inside of the card instead of the front. In hindsight, I prefer the ones that have the sentiment on the front of the card, as well as sometimes in it. I didn't always put a sentiment on the inside of the card. So in hindsight, I probably would go and put my sentiment on the front of the card, but it was fairly symmetrical the way the grass was and the zebra in the middle, that I thought the sentiment would put it a little bit off balance. Another option would be if you are the type that likes to cut your sentiments and make them so they are kind of in one line at the top or the bottom. I think that would work well. But just the way that sentiment was, it was kind of a block of words. I thought it would look a little bit odd on that front. So for this one, I just chose some Raven cardstock for the mat. Just like the last one, it's cut to the same size. The mat is 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My ink blended and stamped background is 3 3/4 by 5 inches. So very, very, very simple designs. So you can see with this, because I don't have that sentiment on the front, it is fairly sparse. One way to make it a little bit less sparse is you could make your layers a little bit smaller, have a little bit more white space on the outside of the card, and it would just frame it in a little bit closer. For the third card, once again, I'm doing the same ink blending. For the first 3 cards, my cards are vertical. The last card is going to be horizontal, and that one will have a little bit of a different background, and you'll see that when I get to it. This one here is going to be for the giraffe. So once again, same colors, crushed olive at the bottom, then tumbled glass, and then broken china for the top. I'm using my large Spellbinders ink blending brushes. I love these for doing backgrounds because you can get color over that whole background really, really quickly and easily. And I'm also using my sticky mat to hold my cardstock because it just makes it really, really easy to do that ink blending without that paper moving. So for this one, I decided to try grabbing my acrylic block and doing that stamping. You can see that I, because of that little tiny raised area that I was talking about earlier in my stamp, sometimes I'll go back in and try to fill that in a little bit. Often when I'm doing this stamping, I'm trying to press on that area, but because my block is thicker than the lid of the Misti, it's hard to really get pressure in just a specific area. So there are some areas that the stamping is a little bit lighter because of that raised edge, but still we have that texture in there. And the giraffe itself is a lot taller, so it's a little bit more forgiving when it comes to filling in the area of the card. So I figured out where I wanted that giraffe to go, placed my sentiment where I thought it would fill it in nicely, using my Misti stamping tool for that, and then stamped it. I stamped it in black as I've stamped the rest of the cards. This one you could stamp in the rusty hinge, which is the color that the spots were done in, if you wanted it to coordinate just a little bit more with that. On the back of the packaging, the spots are done in black, and then the other layer is done in kind of like a rusty color. You could also do your inking for, or your stamping for the giraffe in those colors as well if you wanted to have some black in the actual animal. I opted not to do that because I thought it would look a little bit more natural this way, and I like it better with the kind of rusty colored spots to it. So while I have the Misti stamping tool out, I grabbed my card base and stamped there. You can see I got a little bit of a black mark on there from my fingers. I just made sure that that was going to be the card front to make sure that my mats or my layers were going to cover it completely, and no one would ever know that there was a fingerprint there. If it was in an area that you could see that was going to ruin the card, I would just take this card base and put it in my scrap store and use it to die cut white pieces. So they never go to waste. It's always handy though when you can cover it up with a layer that you're already planning on putting on the front of the card. So once I have those layers in place, I can glue my giraffe in place, and then we have the final result here. I just love those sentiments and how perfect they are. For the fourth card here, this is the one that I'm going to do as a horizontal card. Now I wanted, because of the 2 poses for the tigers, I wanted there to be a rock for the one to stand on. To me, that's what made the most sense. So I went and grabbed my Uncharted Waters stencil set. There's 6 layers to this stencil. I think I only use 4 of the layers. You don't need to use every single layer from a stencil set. I am not necessarily interested in stenciling the sky to this. I really only want that rock image. So when I'm doing the stenciling, I'm trying to avoid that harsh line at the top so that I don't get a harsh line of the green. And once I took the stencil off, I kind of smoothed it out on the right hand side. There was a little bit of a line, but once I went back in and added a little bit more green there, it hit it really, really well. My tiger die cut is going to be mostly in front of that anyway, so it's going to hide that anyways. After doing the sky in the same 2 colors that I've been using, the tumbled glass and the broken china, I'm going in with some Hickory smoke to do the base of the rock. I start with just using the ink that is left on my ink blending brush. I don't want it to be too dark. I want it to be able to be visible, but I don't necessarily want it to be a really dark colored rock. I don't want to take focus away from the animals. So I'm using the next couple layers to get the detail to that rock. Then that way it's just not kind of a flat blob. And that's one of the things that I love about this stencil is the way that some of the layers are done. You get some definition and some interest in that rock there. So once I have that done, then I'm taking that stamp from the Jump for Joy sentiments that I've been using for every card with the bulrushes. Again, I'm inking without inking those bulrushes, and I'm just creating those grasses and putting that texture in that background. Some of them are going to go right in front of that rock. Some of them are going to go beside it. My die cuts are going to cover some of this here, but it's just going to give that texture and that little bit of interest. If you didn't have a stamp like this, I think grass is pretty easy to take a pen or a marker and just kind of draw it in, and then you can be a little bit more random. I always enjoy having sentiment stamps because sometimes when I draw things, even though it's easy, sometimes it just doesn't come out the way that I like. So I always prefer to have stamps to know that it's going to turn out exactly how I want. So while I have this out here, I'm using my Misti stamping tool to stamp that sentiment in there. And then I'm also going to stamp a sentiment on the inside of the card while I have everything out and ready to go. Might as well get it done all at once. So when I'm stamping my sentiments, there is a grid mark on the top of, or the door of the Misti. I always check to make sure that it's straight. Even when I have put it on there and it looks straight to me, it's always nice to have that confirmation with that grid as to whether it's actually straight or not, especially if it's a longer sentiment. Sometimes it's really easy to curve it or to have one end going up. So to have that grid on the lid there is really invaluable, and I use it often. Even though you can't see me checking it when it's on video, I check it every single time to make sure that it's nice and straight. So I glue my layers onto the base of the card, and this is the tiger here that I want to be standing on the rock. I do prefer this card the way it's filled out with the 2 animals. It just fills it out a little bit better. You could take some of the other animals and have multiples on one card. But I really love the fact that this one, the 2 of them just work well together. To add just a tiny little bit of extra texture, I'm just using a dot of glossy accents for the eyes. Often I will use black enamel accents. My jar of black enamel accents is getting old, so it's really quite sticky and goopy, and sometimes it's hard to get a really tiny dot. As well as the fact that for some of these stamps, it's not super clear exactly where the eye is. So by using the glossy accents, it's just a little bit more subtle than using the black enamel accents. So I let that dry. The dots were really small, so I think I let them dry for 15 minutes or so, and they were totally dry. And here is the final result. Again, they're very simple, quick layering stamps or quick layering stamp cards. So they're not anything that takes a lot of time, but I always love layering stamps. It's fun to play with the different colors and get some quick images. They're with that simple background, those animals are the focus of each one of those cards. And by using the glossy accents dots on the eyes, you get just a little bit of shine when you tilt it into the light. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, I use distress inks on here. They're water soluble. So if you get those glossy accents, if you do your dots really big, there's a chance the ink will run wherever you put that. I didn't have that with mine because I kept them really nice and small, and they just were the perfect accent to the animals. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. Have a fantastic day.